This is Joshua 24, verse 19. You will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. Joshua, on his deathbed, knew the condition of these people and said, you don't know God as a holy God. You won't be able to serve him. He is a jealous God. And look at what he says. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins if you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods. Let me read it this way, according to the New Covenant. Verse 20, if you forsake the Lord and serve money, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after he has done good to you. The people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. And Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen for yourselves the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. Verse 23, Joshua says, now therefore, put away your love of money, which is in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey his voice. If you look in the continuation of that story in the book of Judges, turn over the page to chapter 2, verse 10, you see that even though these people said that they would serve the Lord and forsake the other gods, Judges 2, verse 10, all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. They knew Joshua. They knew about their history, but they didn't know the Lord. And they served other gods. And I wonder what will be the future of CFC 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. It doesn't have to be like it was for the people of Israel. It doesn't have to be like it was for that generation, but we must remember what we have heard. The opposite of God is money. And that's a distinctive message I've heard in CFC. And money has a way of creeping in. The love of money has a way of creeping in. I see it in my own flesh. I see how easy it is to be drawn into that and to not see that distinctive mark between God and money. And it's creeping into Christendom more and more, and it could very easily creep into our churches if it hasn't already. We must fight it, dear brothers and sisters. We must individually fight it. And you see, if you go back to chapter 1, you see what it was like. How did this serving of other gods come in? How will the serving of money come in if it does? We see, first of all, in Judges chapter 1, verse 5, that they were fighting against this one king, the Perizzites, and the king of the Perizzites his name was Adoni-Bezek in verse 5. Judges 1, verse 5. And they found him and fought against him, and they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. But Adoni-Bezek, verse 6, fled, and they pursued him and caught him, but they didn't kill him. They didn't deal radically with the love of money. They cut off his thumbs and his toes, his big toes. That's all they did. And you go on to see that at the end of verse 7, they brought him without his thumbs and big toes to Jerusalem, and he lived there until he died. It started with a little losing of that radical attitude. And that's how it will be. A little compromise in the area of money. Just cut off the big toes, just cut off the thumbs, but let him live there in a corner in your heart or in our hearts. And that's how that little bit of backsliding comes in, a little bit of the love of money. You read further on in chapter 16, relatives who were not part of the Israelites, the relatives of Moses' father-in-law, the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the sons of Judah to the wilderness of Judah, which is the south of Arad, and they went and lived with the people. Relatives have often come in and drawn people away from the church and away from the truth to compromise in some area. That's another way in which the devil will try to sway us. allowing us to be influenced by the love of our relatives. Jesus said, you cannot be my disciple if you love your relatives. Goes on to say in verse 19, you can read that whole chapter, how one after the other, they took possession of parts of the country, but not all of it. Verse 19, the Lord was with Judah, and they took possession of the hill country, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had iron chariots. God saw these little areas of compromise, and little by little, these enemies were allowed to remain. Little by little, that love of money was allowed to remain. And then you see a sad story beginning in verse 27. The Manasseh did not take possession. Verse 29, Ephraim did not take possession. Zebulun, verse 30, did not drive out the inhabitants. Verse 31, Asher did not drive out the inhabitants. Verse 33, Naphtali did not drive out. And then even Dan in verse 34. I think of these families in God's people, these tribes that should have destroyed wherever they were settling. They should have destroyed all the inhabitants, but they did not. And that could easily be the testimony of us in a few years, dear brothers and sisters, if we don't take it radically. The opposite of God is money. But God is on our side to help us.